We have Rashee Rice, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and rookie pick trades to look at. First one, we're going to be looking at some rookie picks. We have Cousins in the 109 versus McBride, a future first and a late second. Now, I'm going to be operating under the assumption that pretty much all these deals, unless stated otherwise, will be super flex leagues. I think we have one or two one quarterback trades to look at. But nonetheless, if you're looking at what we're going to have at the 109, more likely than not, this is going to be Brian Thomas Jr., as it looks like JJ McCarthy is pretty much guaranteed to be a top 10 pick in this year's NFL draft. Last I checked, I think it was like minus 1,600 if you were looking at updated odds. So McCarthy's either going to be pick 6, 7, 8 in your super flex draft. Probably have Bowers going with one of them. Obviously, Rome will be off the board. So 109, I think that you are going to be looking at Brian Thomas Jr. or maybe like AD Mitchell if he ends up being the guy that finds himself in Buffalo. If you're looking at that player versus Trey McBride, I think you can make an argument for one versus the other. Really just whoever you personally would prefer. If you're playing in a tight end premium format, I would understand you wanted to go with McBride based off the fact that he is that cornerstone asset. You can contend with him in the short term, but obviously has the long-term value as well. I do think the target volume is probably going to come down for him just a bit, though, if we get Marvin Harrison Jr. going over to Arizona. Looking at what we have versus Kirk Cousins and a future first and a second rounder, however, I think I'm going to rather take the flexibility of the rookie picks. So I'm going to be going with the Trey McBride, the 2025 first, and the late second round side. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, maybe if you are a super strong contender and you were going to flip the 109 for more, I would understand if you wanted to take the Kirk Cousins side of things. Or maybe if it was like a 14-team super flex league where quarterback was much harder to come by. Now, going over to our next trade, we're going to be looking at Tyreek Hill for Nico Collins and the 107 in a one quarterback format. Now, it's a big deal that this is a one quarterback league. If it was a super flex format, it would be, I mean, Nico Collins in the 107 easily for me. But in your one quarterback league, you're going to have Marvin, Neighbors, Rome, Bowers all gone. Brian Thomas Jr. gone. Pick 7, you're either going to be looking at a quarterback in a 1 QB format, so you're probably not that excited about it. Or instead, you're going to be looking at Xavier Worthy. You're going to be looking at Adonai Mitchell. You're going to be looking at someone that we don't necessarily know what to expect in terms of if they have the ceiling to be a true wide receiver one. Where we know Tyreek Hill, he can be the #1 wide receiver overall. If I was a contending team, I'm probably going to go ahead. I probably will take Tyreek and the 107, considering the fact that this is a one quarterback format. If it's a super flex league, we think we'd be going with the pick. Now, our next deal is super easy. Would you trade Waddle for Higgins and Dell in a 12-team Dynasty league? It's a competing roster, but assuming no injuries, I wouldn't be forced to start any of them. So, I mean, essentially you're saying that I don't necessarily need the depth, and instead I should just be going for the best player available. I don't really care. Even if Waddle is my favorite guy out of this list, you can look in the community rankings right now on the site and see that Waddle's at wide receiver 14, Higgins is at wide receiver 18, Dell's at wide receiver 20. If I had to bet who would be the best dynasty asset out of this group, I would be going with Jalen Waddle, but it's probably like Waddle has a 40% chance. The other two guys have a 30% chance. I mean, they are kind of sitting here and they're all in the same range, in the same tier. So it's not a situation in which we can say that Waddle is by far and away better than the other assets. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to be taking the combination of T. Higgins, Tank Dell relatively easily. If you look at the trade calculator, the calculator on the site says that it's an easy move to go with those players as well. And if you're looking at the trade finder on flogfantasy.com, you can see that, I mean, there's another trade that was made where Waddle was traded essentially for Dell and Higgins. I think that maybe that's where this is coming from. And then there's a separate trade where someone traded Waddle, DeAndre Swift, and a future first for Higgins, JSN, and a future second. So if I'm looking at that, it looks like someone else in another league kind of valued Higgins ahead of Waddle. Another trade, we were looking at Waddle, Freiermuth, Moss versus Higgins, JSN. Another trade is a little bit too big, including Anthony Richardson, to take too many concrete things from. But if we're looking at this, I think regardless of if you're using the trade calculator, the trade finder, your personal preference, they all lean on the Higgins Dell side. Now, if you wanted to pull up our Dynasty trade calculator, you can do so anytime on flogfantasy.com. You can hit the drop down and you can either choose to use the community values, which are completely free for everybody on the site, or you can use the expert values, which is a combination of not only my values, but also the guys at Dynasty Land, Dynasty Domain, Fantasy Stock Exchange, or you can pick any of your individual favorite creators there as well. And then the trade finder is going to be looking at all trades that are made through Sleeper. You can put in your exact league settings as well and look for the players that you want to see who were dealt. And yeah, plus you can find all our rankings on the site. You can find our team analyzer. You can find, all the premium content, including all the Dynasty Rookie Draft guides from all your favorite creators. It's all in one spot, all with one sub on flogfantasy.com. And code FLOCK will get you hooked up with 30% off any sub. And yours truly will break down your Dynasty team in a podcast when you sign up. Now, going over to our next trade, this is going to be a deal where you're selling a bunch of quarters for $1. I mean, we're seeing Justin Jefferson versus Pickens, the 105, Amari, and Zamir White. Now, the 105 is a very exciting player, right? That's Malik Neighbors. So, I mean, you're looking at Neighbors, George Pickens, Amari, and Zamir White versus Justin Jefferson. I like Pickens, I like Neighbors, but Justin Jefferson is Justin Jefferson. On the site, it says that this is a fair deal. To be honest with you, I don't think it's fair. I think I would rather have Jefferson relatively easily. If we're going to go over to the trade finder and see some other Justin Jefferson trades that were just made involving George Pickens as well. Someone traded away Jefferson for Pickens, Joshua Palmer, Freiermuth a second and a third. Now, I think that this trade, you're not getting enough for Jefferson, let alone that trade on the trade finder is just obnoxious. Another one, you're looking at Jefferson Hawkinson for Walker, Pickens, Olave, and a first. Another one, Jefferson versus Pickens, Ridley, 2 first. Another one, Jefferson, Levis, Goff versus Pickens and 2 first. So no matter how you cut it, I'm probably going to go ahead and probably taking the Justin Jefferson side on all of these deals. And maybe it indicates that because of the Cousins news, Jefferson's at least reasonable to buy. Now, going over to our next trade, someone traded away Chubb, Sam Howell, Noah Fant to get Kittle, Keenan, and the 302. So, I mean, if we're looking at this, Fant versus the 3rd round pick, they're about the same. Pick your poison there. I don't necessarily think that there's a right or wrong answer. If I'm looking at Sam Howell versus Keenan Allen, give me Keenan Allen relatively easily. If I'm looking at, Nick Chubb versus George Kittle, probably give me George Kittle. I mean, it's kind of up to you. But nonetheless, if we're looking at the Keenan versus Sam Howell side, it's so lopsided. I think you have to go Kittle, Keenan, and the 3rd. And also, this is another deal that on the site, we're going through and seeing that the calculator is saying you're robbing them with the Kittle side. Now, our next trade is actually a fair trade according to the calculator on the site. We're looking at Drake London in the 107 versus CeeDee Lamb. Now, obviously, if this is a 1 quarterback format, we are going to go ahead. We will take CeeDee Lamb. It won't even be close because the 107 in a 1 quarterback format is going to be much worse. But the 107 in your Superflex league may end up being Rome. May end up being McCarthy, may end up being Bowers, could end up being a very exciting player overall. So if that's the case, I understand why you'd possibly want to be a little more hesitant. I think a lot of this is going to come down to the amount of players that you were starting in your lineup. Now, you can go and pull this up on flogfantasy.com. You can put in your exact league settings on that trade calculator. But, if you're in a spot where, say, you're starting 11 guys from a week-to-week perspective, I understand the thought process of you wanting to go ahead and you wanting to pick up the additional starter and pick up the additional depth. However, if this isn't a league where you're starting 9 guys, you're starting 10 guys, I'm probably going to go ahead. I'm probably going to take the best player in CeeDee Lamb. When in doubt, I typically am just going to go with the best player, though. Now, our next trade we're going to be looking at is Diggs versus a future first, 3rd, and Marvin Mims. Not close for me because I'd rather have a future first over Stephon Diggs. Now, if you look at what news just came out of Houston, it looks like Stephon Diggs did restructure his contract where he's now in a contract year and maybe out of Houston next season. Which I know is good news because maybe you go to a team that has less target competition than Nico Collins, St. Del. But also it may be bad news because maybe you're going from a team with CJ Stroud to a team with no longer competent quarterback play. So I'm not going to be dramatically changing my ranking for Stefon Diggs based off this contract restructuring. It's still an older wide receiver that you pretty much would only want if you were going to be planning on contending in the short term. And in the short term, he has serious target competition. So I would rather have the 2025 first round pick. I don't really care too much about Marvin Mims though. Now our next deal, we traded Diggs Pollard in the 303 for Jaden Reed, the 204, and Jonnu Smith. I mean, if I'm breaking it down this way, I think Diggs versus Jaden Reed, they're going to be in a very similar range. And it almost just comes down to, are you contending? Are you rebuilding? If you're rebuilding, clearly you'd rather have Reed. If you're contending, you'd rather have Diggs. But would I rather have Tony Pollard and a third or an early second round pick? I'm going to go with Tony Pollard in the third over the second. So for that reason, I think I'm going to go Diggs, Pollard in the third. If you're looking at trades in the trade finder that included Stefon Diggs as well as Jaden Reed, here's someone traded Diggs for Reed straight up. Someone traded Diggs in a fourth for Jaden Reed straight up. So essentially they just are getting swapped around for each other. Diggs and Kittle versus Reed and McBride. I mean, you're going to assume that people are giving more value to Diggs. Diggs and Pitts versus Reed, a first and Michael Mayer. So, I mean, I don't know. I think I'm going to go with the Diggs side. But obviously, if you are a rebuilding roster, you don't have much use for Tony Pollard. You don't have much use for Stefon Diggs. Now, our next trade, 12-team Superflex start 8. So, definitely a shallower format overall. And in these shallower leagues, we're more so incentivized to just go through and build around the best player, not necessarily care as much about depth. And if you're looking at this here, the best player in this deal will be Michael Pittman Jr. It's Pittman and Goddard versus Kelsey and Adams. I understand that we're a contending team, but it does seem like we are paying the absolute most to bring in these contending pieces. Like with Michael Pittman Jr., with Dallas Goedert, you're still going to be able to contend. It's not like these are assets that are just an absolute zero for 2024. So I personally am going to go ahead and just keep the best player, keep Michael Pittman Jr., keep someone that has that extended runway. Now, our next deal, someone says, sold Tank Dell and Raheem Mostert for Drake London. Now, this was before the Stefon Diggs deal. And I understand a lot of people want to say, oh, no, Stefon Diggs coming over is going to help Tank Dell. He's going to be open. It's not how it works. I think that this is a phenomenal deal, to be completely honest with you. If you were able to pivot from Tank Dell to Drake London, where London's pretty much consensus a top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty at this point, I think it's a trade that you kind of have to be excited for. Now, another deal that we're going to be looking at with Stefon Diggs. There are a million Stefon Diggs trades here. Stefon Diggs or the 109 in a PBR Superflex start 9. It's would you rather have Stefon Diggs or Brian Thomas Jr. or whatever rookie wide receiver lands in Buffalo. And in my mind, it's not that close. I'm going to be going with the 109, one quarterback format. Give me Stefon Diggs. Next trade, Rashee Rice versus the 112. Now, I understand, yes, maybe you are scared. Maybe you are nervous about what's happening with Rashee Rice. This is a completely fine price point to go out there and buy him at, though. Would I trade the 106? Would I trade the 107 for him? Would I trade a pick that ends up being Rome? Hell to the no. But if instead I can give away a pick that's Troy Franklin, where while Rashee Rice does have, I mean, a lot of downside, whatever rookie you're taking at the 112 has just as much downside and maybe not more. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to make that play. Now, of course, disclaimer, at the time of this recording, we don't really have any Rashee Rice news. His lawyer did confirm that he was the one driving the car, but outside of that, we don't really have much. Now, someone traded Wandale in a second for Rashee Rice in a fourth. Another great move to go out there and buy the dip on Rashee Rice. I'll reiterate what we say every offseason. I mean, remember at one point last year when we were doing those underdog drafts constantly, Alvin Kamara was my most drafted running back when everybody thought he was going to miss a considerable amount of time. And my explanation was the NFL wants to see their good players on the football field. So I kind of think the same thing here with Rashee Rice. I think the NFL wants to see the best players that they have on the field. And I think they probably want to get Rashee Rice out there. Now, I know what everybody else is going to think about this trade, but I want to talk about it a bit. Anthony Richardson in the 108 versus the 101. I understand Anthony Richardson is a quarterback that has a lot of rushing upside, that has the job security, that flashed before he was injured in his rookie season. And he is a cornerstone asset, if there ever was one, and that you can contend with him in the short term. And he has the long-term upside where if you're a rebuilding team, you don't need to sell him. For this reason, you are seeing in a lot of different spots, Anthony Richardson being ranked back-to-back with the 101. Like if you look at the community rankings right now, and if you look at what happens in our Dynasty startup mock drafts that we do on this channel, pretty much you see Anthony Richardson in all of them going somewhere in between the 101 and the 102. And I want to be on record saying if you can hit the reset button and you can bring in Caleb Williams, you can bring in another quarterback with rushing upside that's the #1 overall pick, that's younger, that doesn't have the injuries. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to make that pivot any day of the week. I think you want to go ahead and you want to take Caleb Williams over Anthony Richardson. Now, the 108 is obviously a considerable piece to be adding on here. The 108 is going to be a very good prospect. So it is tougher. If you had the chance to sell Richardson for the 101 straight up, I'm definitely doing it. But with the 108 involved, I think it's a very fair trade. The trade calculator has the Richardson and the 108 side winning this deal. But I do think at the end of the day, at least for me, it is very fair. But I think that's all I got for you. Really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like, subscribe. And if you want to check out our trade calculator, we can put in your exact league settings, put in exactly where you want to draw those values from, whether it's my rankings, the community rankings, the expert rankings, or any other creators you pretty much watch on YouTube. It's all on flogfantasy.com. Code FLOG is going to hook you up with 30% off any sub. Plus, yours truly will break down your Dynasty team in a podcast. But that's all I got for you. Really appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.